What did you just say? Omar Rahman's voice dropped, sharp enough to cut through the sound of the rain. The boy didn't flinch. He stood there, soaked, trembling, but unmovable, staring straight at one of the most powerful men in the country. Our mom said you'd try to deny it, he said quietly. But you're still our father. The world went silent. Lightning flashed across the lake behind them, illuminating two identical faces, and something in their eyes that made Omar's blood run cold. Because in that split second, he saw himself. The other boy stepped forward, holding out a crumpled envelope with shaking hands. She said to give you this, if she couldn't make it. Omar didn't take it. Not yet. Because if he did, then everything he had spent 8 years forgetting would come crashing back. Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story might change the way you see people forever. Because what those boys were about to reveal would destroy a past he thought was gone forever. The rain followed him all the way to the lake. Omar Rahman didn't slow down as his black SUV turned off the main road and onto the narrow gravel path leading to the lake house. The tires crunched steadily beneath him, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet stretch of land. It had been years since he had driven this road himself, years since he had chosen to come back. He preferred distance, distance from noise, distance from people, distance from anything that didn't serve a purpose. And yet tonight, he had come here anyway. Not for business, not for strategy, not even for rest. But because for the first time in a long time, something in his world had started to feel unstable. The city had been suffocating him. Meetings stacked on meetings, investors demanding answers, a quiet but growing tension inside his company, one that even his most trusted executives couldn't fully control. Rumors, pressure, expectations. Omar handled all of it the way he handled everything. Silently, precisely, without showing weakness. At 38 years old, Omar Rahman was more than just wealthy. He was a force, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from calculated risks and relentless discipline. Real estate, tech investments, private equity. Entire industries shifted depending on where he decided to place his money. People didn't question Omar Rahman. They followed him. Or they stayed out of his way. He wasn't known for kindness. He wasn't known for warmth. He was known for results, for control, for never letting anything slip through his fingers. And that was exactly why the lake house existed. A place where nothing could reach him. No assistants, no board members, no expectations, just silence, just control. Or at least, that's what it used to be. The headlights of the SUV cut through the rain as the house finally came into view. Large, quiet, standing alone against the dark stretch of water behind it. Omar slowed the car. Something felt off. The porch light was on. He didn't remember leaving it that way. His grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. He parked the car but didn't turn off the engine right away. Instead, he sat there for a moment, staring at the house like it was something unfamiliar, like it didn't belong to him anymore. Then he stepped out. The rain hit him immediately, cold and steady, soaking into the shoulders of his coat. He barely noticed. His focus had already shifted forward. Toward the door, toward the two small figures standing there. He stopped. For a brief second, everything inside him went completely still. Two boys, identical, standing under the dim porch light, their clothes damp, their posture stiff, their eyes locked onto him like they had been waiting longer than they should have. Omar didn't speak. He simply walked forward, each step slow, controlled, deliberate. He had faced billion-dollar negotiations without hesitation. But this was something else. Something that didn't follow logic. Something that didn't belong in his world. The boys didn't move. They didn't run. They didn't look away. And for reasons he couldn't explain, that unsettled him more than anything. When he finally reached the steps, he stopped just a few feet away from them. Up close, the details were clearer. Worn shoes, thin jackets, faces too serious for children their age. And eyes that made something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. Familiar. Dangerously familiar. "Are you Omar Rahman?" The question cut through the rain. Simple. Direct. Omar held their gaze. "I am." The answer came automatically, because that was who he was. Omar Rahman, the man who owned half the skyline in 3 major cities. The man whose name carried weight in rooms he had never even stepped into. The man who had spent years building a life that allowed no room for uncertainty. And yet, standing in front of these 2 boys, for the first time in a long time, he felt something he didn't recognize. Not fear, not anger, something deeper, something unfinished. One of the boys stepped forward slightly, holding out a worn envelope. "She said to give you this." Omar looked at it, didn't take it. Not yet. Because something inside him was already telling him. The moment he did, nothing would be the same again. The rain continued to fall around them, steady and relentless, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Omar Rahman had come to the lake house to escape everything, to regain control, to reset. But as he stood there, facing 2 children who shouldn't have been there, he realized something he hadn't expected. Control was already slipping, and whatever was waiting inside that envelope was about to change everything. The envelope trembled slightly in Omar Rahman's hand. For a moment he simply stared at it, standing in the middle of his own living room as if he were a guest who had walked into the wrong place. The boys sat quietly on the couch, watching him without speaking, without interrupting, waiting. They had been waiting their entire lives for this moment. Omar could feel it. He finally opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin, folded carefully, as if whoever wrote it had taken their time, despite everything. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the first line. And then, he stopped breathing. The handwriting. There was no mistake. Hannah. The name slipped out under his breath before he could stop it. Across the room, Eli's head lifted slightly. "You know her," he said. It wasn't a question. Omar didn't answer right away. His eyes had already dropped back to the letter. "Omar, if you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. I don't know how to start this, or if I even have the right to. But I'm asking you for one thing, and it's not for me. Please don't send them away before you hear the truth." Omar's jaw tightened. The truth. He continued reading. "Their names are Eli and Evan. They're 8 years old. And yes, they're yours." The room seemed to tilt. Omar lowered the paper slightly, his gaze drifting toward the boys sitting just a few feet away from him. 8. The number hit him again, heavier this time. His eyes moved between their faces. The same structure, the same quiet intensity. And now, the same truth staring back at him. He forced himself to keep reading. "I tried to find you, more than once. But every door I knocked on stayed closed. Every person I spoke to told me the same thing, that I didn't belong in your world." Omar's hand tightened around the paper. A faint memory flickered at the edge of his mind, Security, assistance, layers of people designed to keep problems away from him, to keep people like her away. He kept reading. I'm not writing this to blame you, maybe I should, but I don't have the energy for that anymore. The words felt heavier now, more fragile, more real. I raised them the best I could. I worked every job I could find. Some days were harder than others. Most days I didn't know if I was enough. But I never told them to hate you. They deserve better than that. Across the room, Evan shifted slightly, his fingers tightening around the strap of his backpack. Omar noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. He looked back at the letter. I told them the truth, not all of it, just enough for them to understand that you existed, that you weren't a bad man, just someone who didn't know. Omar exhaled slowly. Didn't know. That was true. But somehow, it didn't make it better. If you're reading this, it means I'm in the hospital, and it means I had no other choice. The words blurred slightly. Omar blinked once, forcing his focus back. I'm not asking you for money. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to look at them, really look at them, and decide for yourself what kind of man you want to be. Silence filled the room. Heavy, unavoidable. Omar lowered the letter completely this time. His gaze slowly lifted to the boys. They hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. They were watching him now, waiting for something. An answer, a reaction, a decision. Eli spoke first. Well? His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something sharp, something defensive. Is it true? Omar didn't respond immediately, because for the first time in a very long time, he didn't have control over the answer. His mind was already racing, piecing together fragments he had buried years ago. A summer. A woman by the lake. A name. Hannah Brooks. The memory hit harder this time. Not as a distant thought, but as something real, something he had chosen to leave behind. His gaze shifted back to the boys, to their faces, to the details he had ignored just minutes ago. The resemblance wasn't subtle anymore. It was undeniable. Evan swallowed slightly. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. We just needed to know we came to the right place. The right place. Omar looked around the room, at the walls, at the windows, at the life he had built. Carefully, deliberately, without space for anything unpredictable. And now, everything had changed. Eli stood up suddenly. We shouldn't have come, he said, his voice tighter now. This was a mistake. Evan looked at him quickly. Eli. No, Eli cut in. Mom was wrong. He doesn't even want us here. Omar's head snapped slightly toward him. That's not what I said. You didn't have to, Eli shot back. You haven't said anything. The accusation landed, harder than anything Omar had heard in years, because it was true. Silence had always been his weapon, his shield. But now, it felt like a failure. Evan stood up more slowly. We can go, he said quietly. We'll figure something out. Omar's grip tightened around the letter. They were leaving. Just like that. After everything. They were ready to walk away, just like he had once done. The realization hit him harder than expected, and for the first time, he moved without calculating it. Wait. The word came out sharper than intended. The boys froze. Omar took a step forward. Then another. closing the distance between them. His voice, when he spoke again, was lower now, controlled, but different. "Sit down." Eli didn't move. "Why?" he challenged. Omar held his gaze. "Because we're not done talking." A pause. Tension hung between them. Then slowly, reluctantly, Eli sat back down. Evan followed. Omar stood in front of them, the letter still in his hand. The past, the present, the truth, all colliding in one moment. He looked at them again, really looked this time, and something inside him shifted. Not completely, not yet, but enough. Enough to know one thing. Nothing about this night was going to be simple, and whatever came next would change all of them. The name refused to leave his mind. Hannah Brooks. It echoed quietly beneath every thought, threading its way through memories Omar Rahman had spent years refusing to revisit. He stood near the window, the letter still in his hand, but his focus had shifted far beyond the room, beyond the lake, beyond the present. 8 years ago. He hadn't been Omar Rahman then, not fully. Back then he had been a man trying to escape himself. The memory came back slowly at first, like a reflection on water, blurred and distant. A summer. Warmer air. The same lake, but brighter. Lighter. Alive. Omar had arrived in Lakewood Bay under a different name. Adam. No last name, no title, no expectations. He remembered how strange it had felt at the beginning, walking into places without people recognizing him, speaking without being measured, existing without the weight of everything he had built. For the first time in years, he had been invisible. And for reasons he didn't fully understand at the time, he had needed that. His father had just begun to lose control of the family empire back then. Boardroom conflicts, internal power struggles, pressure mounting from every direction. Omar had been preparing to take over, to fix what others had broken. But something in him had cracked under the weight of it. So he left. No press. No announcements, no explanations. Just a quiet disappearance. Lakewood Bay had been the perfect place for that. Small, unremarkable, the kind of town where people noticed faces, but not status. He had rented a modest room near the lake, avoiding anything that connected him to his real identity. No tailored suits, no drivers, no assistants. Just simple clothes, simple routines, simple silence. At first, it had been uncomfortable. Then, it had become something else. Something he hadn't expected. Peace. The memory sharpened. A small diner by the roadside. Faded red booths. The smell of coffee and warm bread lingering in the air. The soft hum of conversation that never rose too loud. That was where he had seen her. Hannah. She had been moving quickly between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease, her hair tied back loosely, a few strands falling across her face as she worked. There had been nothing extraordinary about the setting, nothing designed to impress. And yet, he remembered noticing her immediately, not because she stood out, but because she didn't try to. Coffee? Her voice had been calm, natural. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just direct. He had looked up from the menu, meeting her eyes for the first time. There had been no recognition there, no calculation, just curiosity. Yes, he had answered simply. She had nodded once and moved on, already focused on the next table. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. He had come back the next day, and the day after that. At first, it had been about routine. A place to sit, a place to think, but slowly, it became about something else. Conversation. Hannah didn't treat him like anyone special. She didn't know who he was. And because of that, she didn't filter herself. "You don't talk much," she had said one afternoon, sliding a plate in front of him. "Neither do you," he had replied. She had smiled slightly. "I talk when it matters." That had stayed with him, because it was true. Everything she said mattered. There was a quiet strength in her, not loud, not forced, just steady. She worked long hours, picked up extra shifts, helped other employees when they fell behind, never complained, never asked for anything. And yet, she always noticed when someone else needed help. He remembered one particular evening. A customer had raised his voice over something small, something insignificant. Hannah had stood there, listening, absorbing the frustration without reacting. When the man finally stopped, she had simply apologized, corrected the issue, and moved on. No anger, no pride, just calm. Omar had watched the entire exchange. "You should have said something," he told her later. Hannah had shrugged lightly. "Not everything needs a fight. And if it's unfair?" She had looked at him then. Really looked. "Then you decide if it's worth your peace." That was the moment something shifted. He wasn't used to people who chose peace. In his world, everything was a battle. Everything had a cost. But Hannah, she moved through life differently. And without realizing it, Omar began to follow that rhythm. Their conversations grew longer, from passing remarks to shared moments, from small talk to something deeper. Evenings by the lake, quiet walks, silences that didn't feel empty. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as Omar Rahman, not as a billionaire, just as a man. And he had let himself believe it could stay that way, that he could stay that way. But reality had never been something he could escape for long. The call came late one night, urgent, unavoidable. His father had collapsed. The company was spiraling. Decisions needed to be made. Immediately. There had been no time, no room for hesitation. Omar remembered standing outside the small house he had rented, phone pressed to his ear. The world he had tried to leave behind crashing back into place. He had known in that moment. Everything was about to change. He could have told her, explained everything, given her the truth she deserved. But instead, he chose what he always chose: control, distance. He left before sunrise. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. The memory ended there, abrupt, incomplete. Omar opened his eyes. The lake house came back into focus around him. The rain, the silence, the two boys sitting just behind him. 8 years. He had buried that summer like it had never happened, like it didn't matter, like it couldn't reach him. But now, it had. And it had brought something with it, something he couldn't ignore, something he couldn't undo. Omar turned slowly, his gaze finding the boys again. Eli was watching him closely. Evan sat quieter, but his attention hadn't moved. They weren't just waiting anymore. They were searching for something, for him. And for the first time since they arrived, Omar Rahman understood something he hadn't allowed himself to before. The past he had walked away from had never truly let him go. And now, it was standing right in front of him. The letter trembled slightly as Omar lowered it. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, the weight of 8 years pressing down on him in a way no boardroom battle ever had. Across from him, Eli and Evan watched in silence. They had already lived the truth. Now it was his turn. Omar drew in a slow breath and lifted the letter again, reading the next part more carefully this time. No longer scanning, but absorbing every word. I found out a few weeks after you left. At first I thought it was just stress. I had been working too much, barely sleeping. But then the doctor confirmed it. I was pregnant. Omar's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked instinctively toward the boys. 8 years. The timeline lined up perfectly now. Too perfectly. I tried to reach you. I really did. I went back to the place you were staying. The landlord said you checked out early that morning, no forwarding address. I called the number you gave me. It didn't work anymore. For a while I thought maybe something had happened to you. Omar swallowed. He remembered that number. A temporary line. Disconnected the moment he returned to the city. Standard procedure. Clean. Efficient. Heartless. I didn't know your real name. I didn't know where you came from. All I had was Adam and a memory. The words seemed to echo in the room. A memory. That was all he had left her with. Omar closed his eyes briefly, then forced himself to continue. I thought about leaving town, starting over somewhere else where no one knew me. But then I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Evan shifted slightly on the couch. Eli didn't move, but his shoulders stiffened. So I stayed. I worked double shifts at the diner, picked up cleaning jobs at night, did whatever I could find. Some days I was so tired I couldn't feel my hands, but I kept going, because I had to. Omar's grip on the letter tightened. He could see it now. Not as words, but as images. Hannah moving from one job to another, carrying trays, scrubbing floors, walking home alone in the dark, growing heavier with each passing week, and him, gone, unreachable, untouchable. When they were born, everything changed. Not easier, never easier, but clearer. Omar glanced at the boys again, at the way they sat, close, but not touching. Used to sharing space, but not expecting comfort. They were small, too small, and I was terrified I wouldn't be enough. Evan's fingers tightened slightly around the fabric of his sleeve. Omar noticed. Of course he did. People talked. They always do in small towns. Some said I made it up. Others said I deserved it, that I should have known better. Eli's jaw clenched. They said worse than that, he muttered under his breath. Omar looked up sharply. Eli met his gaze. Unapologetic. Kids at school, he added. Their parents talk. They hear things. Evan lowered his eyes. They said Mom was lying, he whispered. That there was no dad. The words hit harder than anything in the letter. Omar didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. I didn't fight them. Not because they were right, but because I didn't have time. Omar continued reading. Every day was about getting through the next one. Food, rent, bills, making sure they had shoes that fit, making sure they didn't feel what I felt. The simplicity of it made it worse. No drama, no exaggeration, just survival. I never told them to hate you. I never told them you left. I told them you didn't know. Omar's breath caught slightly. That part felt undeserved. Because I didn't want them growing up carrying something that heavy. The room felt smaller now, the air tighter. They asked about you sometimes. Not often, but enough. I told them you were someone important, that maybe one day they'd meet you. Eli looked away. Evan stared at the floor. Neither of them spoke. Omar didn't look at them. He couldn't. I didn't know if that day would ever come. He turned the page. There was more. Of course, there was more. The last year has been harder. I started getting sick. At first, I ignored it. There wasn't time to stop. Omar's expression darkened. But it got worse, and eventually, son, I had to go to the hospital. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I won't go into details. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. Omar's hand stilled. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect them from it anymore. Evan inhaled sharply. Eli didn't move. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to send them to you. Omar looked up. Finally, at them. But I ran out of choices. Eli's voice came quietly this time. She didn't want to send us, he said. She cried when she told us. Evan nodded. She said it was just for a little while. Omar's chest tightened. They're good boys. Better than I ever expected. Stronger than they should have to be. Omar looked at them again. Really looked this time. And for the first time, he didn't just see resemblance. He saw history, sacrifice, time he hadn't been part of. I'm not asking you to take responsibility. I'm not asking you to fix anything. Omar frowned slightly. Then why? I'm asking you to give them a chance, to see for yourself who they are, and decide what happens next. The letter ended there. No signature. Just blank space. Omar lowered the paper slowly. The room was silent again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything that had been left unsaid for 8 years. Eli shifted slightly. So, that's it? He asked. Omar didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in his life, there wasn't a clear next move, no strategy, no calculation, just 2 boys sitting in front of him, and a past he could no longer ignore. Evan spoke softly. Are we staying here? The question lingered. Simple, direct, and impossible to answer lightly. Omar looked at them, then at the letter, then back at them again. And for the first time, he understood something he had never had to face before. This wasn't a problem to solve. This was a responsibility. And he had no idea what to do with it. The hospital lights were too bright. Hannah Brooks squinted slightly as she stepped out of the examination room, her hand still resting lightly against the wall for balance. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and something colder, something sterile that never quite felt human. Miss Brooks? She turned slowly. The doctor stood behind her, his expression carefully neutral, the kind that tried to soften the truth before it was spoken. We should talk about your results. Hannah forced a small nod. I figured. They stepped into a quiet consultation room. The door closed gently behind them, sealing the conversation away from the rest of the world, but not from reality. The doctor sat across from her, folding his hands. It's progressed faster than we expected, he said. You're going to need treatment soon. Delaying it much longer could make things more difficult. More difficult. Hannah almost smiled at the choice of words. Her entire life had been difficult. What kind of treatment? She asked. Intensive, he replied carefully. It will require time, regular visits, possibly a hospital stay depending on how your body responds. Time. That was the one thing she didn't have. Hannah lowered her gaze briefly, her mind already moving. Not to fear, not to panic, but to logistics. Work. Rent. The boys. "What happens if I don't?" she asked quietly. The doctor hesitated, then answered honestly. "It will get worse." Silence settled between them. Hannah nodded once. "Okay." That was all she said. No tears, no breakdown, just acceptance. Because she didn't have the luxury of anything else. The diner was louder than usual that afternoon. Plates clattered, conversations overlapped. The air felt thick, crowded, restless. Hannah moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing trays, refilling drinks, forcing her body to keep up with the pace it had followed for years, even when it didn't want to. "Table 6 needs their order checked," the manager called out sharply from behind the counter. "I'm on it," Hannah replied, already turning. Her head felt slightly light, but she ignored it. She always did. At a nearby booth, Eli and Evan sat quietly with their homework spread out in front of them. It wasn't unusual. They often stayed there after school while Hannah finished her shift. It was cheaper than childcare, and safer than leaving them alone. "Mom," Evan said softly as she passed by. "You look tired." "I'm okay," she answered automatically, offering a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Eli watched her more closely. "You said that yesterday, too." "I mean it," she insisted gently. "Just a long day." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue either. He had learned not to. Hannah turned back to her work, weaving through the tables as she always had. Until, "Hey." The voice came sharp and impatient. She stopped. A man in an expensive suit sat at one of the corner tables, his expression already irritated. "Yes, sir?" she asked politely. "This coffee is cold." "I'm sorry about that," Hannah replied quickly. "I'll get you a fresh one right away." "It shouldn't have been cold in the first place," he snapped. "What are you doing exactly? Just walking around?" The surrounding tables grew quieter. Hannah kept her tone even. "I'll fix it right now." The man leaned back, his gaze flicking toward the boys sitting across the room. "Those yours?" he asked, nodding in their direction. Hannah stiffened slightly. "Yes." "They're in the way." "They're seated, sir," she replied carefully. "They don't belong here," he said flatly. "This isn't a daycare." A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably. Hannah felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. Embarrassment, frustration, but above all, restraint. "I'll make sure they stay out of the way," she said quietly. The man scoffed. "Maybe you should focus on doing your job instead of bringing your personal problems to work." The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Across the room, Eli had already stood up. "Hey, Eli," Hannah said firmly, not turning around. "Sit down." But sit. There was something in her voice that made him listen. Reluctantly, he lowered himself back into the booth, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Evan reached over, placing a small hand on his arm. "It's okay," he whispered. It wasn't, but they both knew better than to say that out loud. Hannah returned with a fresh cup of coffee, setting it down gently in front of the man. "Here you go." He didn't thank her, didn't even look at her. She turned away before he could say anything else, because she had learned some fights weren't worth having. Some words weren't worth carrying. That night, the apartment felt smaller than usual. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. Hannah sat at the small kitchen table, a stack of bills spread out in front of her. The numbers didn't add up. They never did. Rent was overdue. Utilities were close behind. And now, medical expenses. She pressed her fingers lightly against her temple, trying to steady the wave of exhaustion creeping in. "Mom?" Evan's voice pulled her back. She looked up. Both boys stood in the doorway, watching her. "We finished our homework," Eli said. "Good," she replied softly. They didn't move. Eli stepped forward. "Are we okay?" The question was simple, but it carried everything. Hannah forced a small smile. "Of course we are." Evan frowned slightly. "You've been saying that a lot." Hannah's chest tightened. She looked at them, really looked at them, at how much they had grown, at how much they had already learned to notice. Too much, far too much. She exhaled slowly, then made a decision. "I need you to listen to me," she said gently. They both straightened slightly. "If something happens, I want you to go somewhere." Eli's expression changed immediately. "What do you mean, something happens?" "It's just a precaution," she said quickly. "Nothing to worry about." "Where?" Evan asked quietly. Hannah hesitated, then reached for a piece of paper. She wrote down an address, folded it carefully, and placed it on the table. "There's a house by a lake," she said. "If you ever need help, you go there." Eli frowned. "Who lives there?" Hannah's hand stilled for a brief second. Then, "Someone who should have been there a long time ago." The words hung in the air, unanswered, unexplained, but important. Evan picked up the paper carefully. "And he'll help us?" Hannah looked at him, really looked, then nodded once. "I believe he will." Even if she wasn't sure anymore. The nights grew longer after that. Hannah Brooks began measuring time in smaller pieces, hours instead of days, breaths instead of plans. She woke before sunrise, moved through each shift with the same quiet determination, and returned home with a fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix. Because sleep didn't fix what was happening inside her, and she knew it. The diagnosis sat in the back of her mind like a ticking clock she couldn't turn off. Every cough that lingered too long, every moment her vision blurred at the edges, every wave of dizziness that came without warning. They all said the same thing. Time was running out, but she didn't allow herself to think about that. Not fully. Because every time she did, her mind went to the same place. Eli, Evan. What would happen to them if she couldn't keep going? That question followed her everywhere. At work? At home? Even in the quiet moments when the boys were asleep and the world should have felt still. It never did. One evening, the dizziness hit harder than usual. Hannah was in the middle of clearing a table when the room shifted slightly around her. The edges of her vision darkened, the sounds of the diner blending together into something distant and unclear. She gripped the edge of the table, forced herself to stay upright. "Hey, are you okay?" A coworker's voice reached her from somewhere far away. "I'm fine," Hannah said automatically, though her voice felt thin. "You don't look fine. I just need a second." She straightened slowly, willing her body to cooperate. Because she couldn't afford not to, not here, not now. But when she took a step forward, her legs gave out. The tray slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor with a sharp, echoing sound that cut through the entire diner. Everything stopped. Voices. Movement. Even the noise from the kitchen seemed to disappear. "Hannah!" Someone rushed toward her. She barely registered it. The floor felt cold beneath her, the lights above her too bright. And then, nothing. When she woke up, it was quiet. Too quiet. The steady beep of a monitor replaced the noise of the diner, The smell of antiseptic filled the air again. Hospital. Hannah blinked slowly, her mind catching up to her body. "You're awake." She turned her head slightly. The doctor stood near the bed, his expression serious. "You collapsed at work," he explained. "They brought you in." Hannah swallowed. "How long?" "A few hours." Her chest tightened. "The boys—" "They're fine," he said quickly. "A neighbor is with them." Relief washed over her, but it didn't last long. Because she knew this wasn't something she could ignore anymore. "You need to start treatment immediately," the doctor continued. "Waiting isn't an option now." Hannah stared at the ceiling. She had known this moment would come. She just hadn't been ready for it. "I can't stay here," she said quietly. "You don't have much of a choice." "I do," she replied. "I have 2 kids." The doctor paused. "I understand that," he said carefully. "But if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of them at all." The words hit harder than expected, because they were true. And truth was something Hannah had never run from. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "How long?" she asked. "For the initial treatment? A few weeks at least. Maybe longer, depending on how you respond." Weeks. Hannah's mind moved quickly. Too quickly. She had no one. No family nearby. No one she trusted enough to leave the boys with for that long. No one except... Her chest tightened. The memory surfaced again. A lake. A house. A man who had once promised nothing, but had meant everything. Omar. Or Adam. Or whoever he really was. She had spent years convincing herself she didn't need him, that she could do it alone. And she had, until now. That night, after she was discharged with strict instructions to return the next morning, Hannah sat at the small kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of her. Eli and Evan were asleep in the next room. The apartment was quiet. Still. But her mind wasn't. She stared at the paper for a long time before picking up the pen. What do you say to someone who disappeared from your life 8 years ago? What do you ask from someone who never chose to stay? Her hand hovered for a moment. Then, she began to write. Not everything, not the anger, not the pain, just the truth. Simple, direct, careful, because this wasn't about her. It was about them. The next morning, everything moved faster than she expected. The hospital called. Her condition had worsened overnight. She needed to come in immediately. No delays. No waiting. Hannah packed quickly, her hands steady even as her heart raced. She moved through the apartment with quiet precision, gathering what she could, organizing what she couldn't. Because if she stopped, if she allowed herself to feel everything, she wouldn't be able to do what needed to be done. "Mom?" Evan stood in the doorway, his voice small. Eli appeared behind him a second later, already alert, already sensing something was wrong. "What's going on?" Eli asked. Hannah turned to face them. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Because this was the part she had been trying to avoid. "I need you to listen to me," she said gently. They both stepped closer. "I have to go to the hospital for a little while." Evan's brow furrowed. "Are you sick?" Hannah forced a soft smile. "I just need to get checked, that's all." Eli didn't believe it. She could see it in his eyes. "You're not telling us everything." She stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm telling you what you need to know right now." That didn't satisfy him. But he didn't argue. Not this time. Hannah reached for the envelope on the table. the one she had written the night before. She held it out. "If I'm not back in a couple of days," she said carefully, "I want you to take this and go to the address inside." Evan took the envelope slowly. "The lake house?" he asked. Hannah nodded. Eli's expression hardened. "That man, the one you told us about?" "Yes." "And you trust him?" The question lingered. Heavy. Unavoidable. Hannah hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then, yes. Even if she wasn't sure. Because right now, he was the only chance they had. Eli looked down at the envelope, then back at her. "What if he doesn't help us?" Hannah's chest tightened, but her voice didn't waver. "Then you leave," she said. "And you keep going." Silence filled the room. Evan stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "I don't want you to go," he whispered. Hannah closed her eyes, holding him close. "I'll be back," she said softly. She had to believe that, even if she didn't know if it was true. And that was how it began. Not with certainty, not with hope, but with a choice, a final one. To trust a past she had buried, with the future she loved more than anything. Morning came quietly over the lake. A pale gray light slipped through the tall windows, stretching across the marble floors and the untouched furniture that had never been meant to hold voices, footsteps, or the restless energy of children. But now, the house was no longer silent. Omar Rahman stood in the kitchen, staring down at a pan he had no idea how to use. He hadn't cooked a meal in years, not because he couldn't afford to, but because he had never needed to. Everything in his life had always been done for him, efficiently, precisely, without question. But this wasn't something he could delegate, not anymore. He glanced toward the hallway. The boys hadn't come out yet. For a moment, he considered calling someone. Having breakfast delivered, making everything easier, cleaner, more controlled. Then he stopped himself. No, that wasn't the point. He reached for the eggs again, cracking one too hard against the edge of the pan. The shell broke unevenly, a small piece falling into the mixture. Omar frowned slightly. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Behind him, a quiet voice spoke. "You're doing it wrong." Omar turned. Eli stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Evan lingered just behind him, quieter as always. Omar raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You're supposed to crack it softer," Eli continued. "And not over the pan like that." Omar looked back at the egg, then at Eli. "Would you like to take over?" Eli hesitated, then shook his head. "No." Evan stepped forward instead, moving cautiously into the kitchen. "I can show you," he offered quietly. Omar stepped aside without comment. Evan reached for another egg, tapping it gently against the counter before opening it cleanly into a small bowl. "No shells," he said simply. Omar watched him carefully. There was something almost surreal about the moment. A child teaching him how to cook. In his own home, in a life that had never included anything like this. "Where did you learn that?" Omar asked. "Mom," Evan answered. Of course. Everything came back to her. It always would. The room fell quiet again as Evan worked, Eli leaning against the counter, still watching, still guarded. Omar studied them both. The way they moved, the way they spoke, the small habits that felt familiar. And then, without thinking, he said it. "You said you've seen me before." Eli stiffened. Evan paused. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Eli straightened slightly. "We have," he said. Omar's expression didn't change. Where? Eli glanced at Evan, then back at Omar. In the city, he replied. A few months ago. Omar frowned slightly. That's not possible. It is, Eli said firmly. Mom took us there. She had a job interview. Evan nodded quietly. We were outside a big building, he added. There were a lot of people, cameras, security. Omar's mind moved quickly. There were dozens of buildings like that, dozens of days that looked exactly the same. You were getting out of a car, Eli continued. Black, like the one outside. Omar's gaze sharpened. And you're sure it was me? Eli didn't hesitate. Yeah. Evan looked up at him. You didn't see us, he said softly. The words landed heavier than expected. Of course he hadn't. Why would he? Two children standing somewhere in the background of a day filled with meetings, decisions, people who mattered. They wouldn't have registered. They couldn't have. But now, that moment meant something entirely different. Omar leaned back slightly against the counter, his arms crossing unconsciously. And you recognized me last night, he said. Eli nodded. I remembered your face. Evan added quietly. Mom showed us a picture once. A long time ago. Omar's chest tightened slightly. A picture. He hadn't even known one existed. Why didn't you say anything right away? He asked. Eli shrugged. Didn't matter. It did matter. It changed everything. This hadn't been random, hadn't been a desperate guess. They had known. At least enough to be sure they were in the right place. Omar looked at them again, his expression unreadable. You came here expecting me to help you. It wasn't a question. Eli met his gaze. We came because Mom told us to. That's not the same thing. It is to us. The tension in the room shifted slightly. Not hostile, but not comfortable either. Something in between. Something fragile. Evan placed the pan back on the stove, stepping away carefully. It's ready, he said. Omar glanced at it. Perfectly cooked. Of course it was. He reached for 3 plates without thinking, then paused. 3. The number felt strange, unfamiliar, but not wrong. They sat at the table together. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with questions no one knew how to ask. Eli ate quickly, efficiently, like he was used to finishing meals before they disappeared. Evan ate slower, more carefully, glancing up occasionally, as if making sure everything was still real. Omar didn't eat much. His mind was elsewhere. Processing. Recalculating. Trying to fit this new reality into a life that had never allowed for it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The lake was calm again. Still, like nothing had changed. But inside the house, everything had. Omar set his fork down. What happens next? He asked. Eli looked up. You tell us. The responsibility in those words was unmistakable, heavy, unavoidable. Omar held his gaze. For the first time, there was no easy answer, no clear direction. Just 2 boys sitting across from him, and a decision that would define everything that came after. The call came just after noon. Omar stepped outside onto the deck, the wooden boards still damp from the morning rain. The lake stretched out in front of him, calm and deceptively quiet, as if nothing in the world could disturb it. But his world was already shifting. He answered without checking the caller ID. Yes. Sir, we've been trying to reach you. His assistant's voice came through immediately, sharp with urgency. "There's a situation with the board, and—" "Not now," Omar interrupted. A pause. That rarely happened. "Sir, there's something else," she added carefully. "It's about the children." Omar's expression didn't change, but something inside him tightened. "What about them?" "We've done a preliminary background check. There's no official record connecting them to you, no legal claim, no documentation that would—" "I didn't ask for that," Omar said coldly. Another pause. "Yes, sir," she replied quickly. "Of course, but there are risks. If this becomes public, it won't. Sir, with respect, we don't know that." Omar's gaze shifted toward the house. Through the glass, he could see the boys sitting at the table, Eli leaning forward slightly, talking. Evan listening, quiet as always, unaware of everything. "We're arranging a DNA test," his assistant continued. "Discreet. Results within 24 hours. Omar didn't respond immediately, because despite everything, he already knew. Or at least, part of him did. "Do it," he said finally. "Yes, sir." The call ended. Omar lowered the phone slowly, his eyes still fixed on the boys inside. A test. Proof. Something concrete, because that was how he handled uncertainty. He turned it into certainty, even when the truth was already staring him in the face. The tension shifted the moment he walked back inside. Eli noticed it first. "You talked to someone," he said. It wasn't a question. Omar set his phone down on the counter. "I did." "What about?" Eli pressed. "That's not your concern." Eli's jaw tightened. "It is if it's about us." The words landed with more force than Omar expected. Evan glanced between them, sensing the change. "It's okay," he said quietly. "We don't have to know everything." Eli didn't look at him. "Yes, we do." Omar studied them both. The difference between them was becoming clearer. Eli challenged. Evan observed. Two ways of surviving. "Why are you really here?" Omar asked suddenly. Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" "You came to this house. Found me. Gave me a letter." Omar's voice remained calm, but there was something sharper underneath now. "And now you expect me to— what? Take responsibility? Believe everything without question?" Evan's expression shifted slightly. Eli stood up. "We didn't come here for that." "Then why?" "Because we didn't have anywhere else to go," Eli shot back. "Because Mom told us to. Because she trusted you." The word trust echoed again. Omar's expression hardened slightly. "And you trust me?" Eli hesitated, just for a second. "No," he said honestly. Silence. At least he didn't lie. Evan looked down at his hands. "We just hoped," he began, then stopped. Omar watched him. "Hoped what?" Evan swallowed. "That you wouldn't send us away." The simplicity of it made something shift inside Omar. But not enough. Not yet. He crossed his arms. "I don't make decisions based on hope," he said. Eli let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, we figured." The tension snapped. "Eli," Evan said softly. "No," Eli replied. "He wants the truth, right?" He turned back to Omar. "You think we planned this?" he demanded. "That we showed up here because we want something from you?" "I think I don't have enough information," Omar said evenly. "You have enough," Eli shot back. You just don't want to believe it. Omar's gaze sharpened. And you want me to? Yes. Why? Because it's true. The words hung between them, unshaken, unapologetic. Omar held his gaze, and for a moment, he saw it again. That same defiance, that same refusal to back down, a reflection of himself. Eli took a step back. Come on, he muttered to Evan. We're leaving. Evan looked up quickly. What? He doesn't want us here. That's not... It is, Eli cut in. He just said it. Omar didn't move, didn't stop them. Evan stood slowly, uncertainty written across his face. Eli, where are we going? We'll figure it out. Just like their mother had. Always figuring it out. Always alone. Evan hesitated, then followed. Because he always did. They moved toward the door. Small steps. Quiet, but final. Omar watched them. Every instinct he had told him to let them go. This wasn't his responsibility. This wasn't his problem. This was a complication, a risk, something that didn't belong in his world. But then, Evan reached for the door handle and paused. Just for a second, long enough for Omar to notice, long enough for something to shift. Wait! The word came out before he could stop it. Both boys froze. Eli turned slowly. What? Omar stepped forward. One step, then another, closing the distance. You're not leaving, he said. Eli frowned. Why not? Omar didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, he didn't fully know. Not yet, but he knew one thing. If they walked out that door, something would be lost, something he couldn't get back. We're not done, he said finally. Eli's eyes narrowed. With what? Omar held his gaze. The truth. Silence. Evan looked between them, hope flickering again. Carefully. Fragile. Eli hesitated. Then slowly. He stepped back, not fully agreeing, not trusting, but not leaving either. The moment passed. Barely. But it passed. Omar exhaled quietly. Somewhere in the distance, his phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Because for the first time, what was happening here mattered more. And somewhere, deep beneath all the control, all the logic, all the distance, a realization began to form. This wasn't just a test. It was a choice. And the result was going to change everything. The email arrived just after sunset. Omar didn't check it right away. He stood by the window, watching the sky darken over the lake, the fading light stretching across the water in long, quiet lines. Behind him, the house was unusually still. The boys had retreated to separate corners, Eli near the couch, restless, arms folded. Evan by the table, flipping through an old magazine he clearly wasn't reading. They were waiting. Even if they didn't say it. Omar felt it in the air. He finally turned, walking back toward the kitchen counter where his phone lay face down. For a moment, he simply stared at it. A single message. From his assistant. Subject line, confidential, DNA results. His fingers hovered over the screen. For a man who built his life on facts, on certainty, on proof, this should have been simple. Open it. Read it. Decide. But something inside him resisted. Because once he knew, there would be no going back. He picked up the phone anyway, tapped the screen, opened the file. His eyes moved quickly across the text at first. Clinical language, percentages, technical confirmations. His mind translated it automatically, filtering out everything unnecessary. Until it reached the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. The world didn't stop. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden sound, just a quiet, irreversible truth settling into place. Omar lowered the phone slowly, his gaze lifted. Eli noticed first. "What is it?" he asked. Omar didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in years, he didn't have a strategy. No prepared response. No controlled narrative, just the truth. Evan looked up from the table. "Did you find something?" Omar stepped forward, his movements slower now, more deliberate. He stopped a few feet in front of them, held their gaze, and said it. "Yes." One word, but it changed everything. Eli straightened slightly. "And?" Omar didn't look away. "You're mine." Silence. Absolute. Evan's breath caught. Eli didn't move. For a second, neither of them reacted at all, as if their minds hadn't caught up with the words yet. Then, Evan stood first, slowly. "You mean, really?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Omar nodded once. "Yes." Eli's reaction was different. He didn't step forward, didn't soften. He just stared. "So that's it?" he said, his tone flat. "You just say it?" Omar's jaw tightened slightly. "It's the truth." Eli let out a short breath, something between a laugh and disbelief. "Yeah," he muttered. "Funny how that works." Evan glanced at him. "Eli—" "No," Eli said, his voice rising now. "He didn't know, right? That's what Mom said." Omar didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself, because there was nothing to defend. "I didn't," he said. Eli looked at him sharply. "But you left." The words hit harder than any accusation in a boardroom ever had. Omar held his gaze. "I had to." "Everyone has to do something," Eli shot back. "Doesn't mean they leave." Evan stepped closer to him. "She said he didn't know," he repeated softly. "That's different." Eli shook his head. "It's not that different." The tension in the room tightened again, but this time, it wasn't about doubt. It was about truth, and what came after it. Omar exhaled slowly. "There's more," he said. Both boys looked at him. He didn't hesitate this time. "Your mother tried to find me." Evan blinked. "What?" Omar's expression darkened slightly. "She went to my company. Asked to see me." Eli frowned. "And?" "She never got through." Silence. Evan's voice came quietly. "Why not?" Omar looked away for a brief second. Because this part wasn't easy. "My team handles access," he said. "Security, assistants, lawyers." Eli's eyes narrowed. "You mean they turned her away?" Omar didn't respond. He didn't need to. Evan took a small step back. "She tried," he whispered. "Yes. And you didn't know?" "No." The realization settled over them slowly. Heavy. Complicated. Not simple. Not clean. Eli looked down at the floor. "So she wasn't lying," he said under his breath. "She never was," Evan replied. Omar watched them. The shift in their understanding. The way the anger didn't disappear, but changed. Because now it had somewhere else to go, somewhere deeper. He spoke again. I left because I had to take over my family's company, he said. My father collapsed. Everything was falling apart. I didn't have time to explain anything. Eli looked up. You always had time, he said. Omar didn't argue. Because again, it was true. Time had never been the issue. Choice had. I should have come back, Omar admitted. The words felt unfamiliar. Heavy, but necessary. I didn't, Evan studied him carefully. Why? Omar paused. Because that question didn't have a simple answer. Because I thought that part of my life was over, he said finally. Eli let out a quiet breath. Yeah, he said. It wasn't. No, it wasn't. And now, it never would be again. Omar looked at them both, at the reality standing in front of him, at everything he had missed, everything he had lost, and everything he still didn't understand. We're going to the hospital, he said. Evan's head lifted immediately. To see Mom? Yes. Eli hesitated, then nodded once. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close. But it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, something unfinished, something real. Omar turned toward the door, grabbing his keys without another word. Behind him, the boys moved quickly, following. Because no matter what had happened, no matter what they felt, there was one thing that mattered more than anything else: their mother. And for the first time, Omar Rahman was stepping into a life he had never planned, one he couldn't control, one he couldn't predict, but one he could no longer walk away from. The hospital smelled the same as before. Cold, clean, unforgiving. Omar Rahman stepped through the automatic doors with Eli and Evan close behind him. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over everything, flattening color, draining warmth. People moved quickly around them, nurses, doctors, families, but none of it felt real, because all of Omar's focus was on one thing: room 312. She's up there, Evan said quietly, clutching the edge of Omar's sleeve without realizing it. Omar didn't pull away. Not this time. Eli walked slightly ahead, his pace faster, his jaw tight. He didn't look back. Didn't wait. He knew exactly where he was going. Because this place, this fear, was familiar to him. They reached the elevator in silence. The doors opened, closed. The ride up felt longer than it was. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Eli stood still, his earlier anger replaced by something sharper. Worry. The doors opened again. 3rd floor. They stepped out. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with identical doors, identical lights, identical silence, until they reached the right one. 312. Eli stopped. His hand hovered over the handle. For a moment. He hesitated. Then he pushed the door open. Hannah Brooks looked smaller than Omar remembered. She lay in the hospital bed, pale against the white sheets, her hair loosely tied back, her face thinner, more fragile. A monitor beeped steadily beside her, marking time in quiet, consistent intervals. She turned her head at the sound of the door, and for a second, she didn't recognize him. Her eyes moved past Eli and Evan first, relief flooding her expression the moment she saw them. "You're okay," she breathed. Evan ran to her side immediately. "We're here, Mom." Eli followed more slowly, but he didn't stop until he was standing right beside the bed. "We went to the house," he said. just like you said. Hannah nodded weakly. I know you did. Then her gaze shifted, slowly, carefully, until it landed on Omar. And everything changed. The room went still. Not silent, still, as if even the air understood something important was happening. Omar didn't move. Neither did she. 8 years. 8 years of distance, silence, unanswered questions, collapsing into one moment. You came, Hannah said finally, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't relief, it wasn't surprise, just a statement. Omar stepped forward. I did. Eli glanced between them. You know each other, he said. Hannah's eyes didn't leave Omar's. Yes, she replied quietly. Evan looked at Omar. You said you didn't know her name. Omar didn't look away. I remembered. Hannah let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. That's something, she said. The words carried weight, not accusation, but not forgiveness either. Omar moved closer to the bed, stopping a few feet away. I read your letter. I figured you would. I should have. Don't, Hannah interrupted gently. He stopped. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. I didn't write that letter to hear apologies, she said. Omar studied her. You deserved one. Maybe, she admitted. But that doesn't change anything. Eli shifted slightly. What does that mean? He asked. Hannah looked at him. It means the past is the past. Eli frowned. That's it? No, she said softly. It means we deal with what's in front of us now. Evan nodded slowly. That makes sense? Eli didn't look convinced. Omar spoke again. You tried to find me. Hannah met his gaze. I did. And my people turned you away. Yes. There was no anger in her voice, just truth. Omar's jaw tightened. I didn't know. I believe that, she said. That surprised him. You do? Hannah gave a small nod. You wouldn't have let me walk away if you knew. The certainty in her voice caught him off guard. Why do you think that? She held his gaze. Because that's not who you were. The words lingered. Were. Past tense. Eli crossed his arms. So who is he now? No one answered immediately, because none of them knew. Hannah looked at Omar again. You took a test, she said. It wasn't a question. Omar nodded. Yes. And? Omar didn't hesitate this time. They're mine. Evan looked down, a small smile flickering across his face. Eli didn't react the same way. He studied Omar carefully. Now what? He asked. The question hung in the air. Heavy. Real. Unavoidable. Omar looked at Hannah. I'm going to take care of them. Hannah's expression didn't change. They're not a responsibility to manage, she said quietly. They're your children. I know. Do you? The challenge was subtle, but it was there. Omar didn't look away. I'm here, aren't I? Hannah considered that, then nodded slightly. You are. Evan reached for her hand. You're going to get better, right? He asked. Hannah smiled faintly. I'm working on it. Eli looked at her more seriously. You didn't tell us how bad it was. I didn't want you to worry. We worry anyway. Hannah's smile softened. I know. Omar watched the exchange, the quiet strength in it, the connection, the trust. Everything he hadn't been part of. Everything he had missed. "I'll handle the treatment," he said. Hannah looked at him. "I wasn't asking you to. I'm not asking for permission." A pause. Then, Hannah shook her head slightly. "You haven't changed that much." "Some things don't." She studied him for a moment, then sighed softly. "Fine," she said. "But don't do it because you feel guilty." Omar frowned. "Then why should I do it?" Hannah held his gaze. "Because you choose to." The room fell quiet again. Eli looked between them. "That sounds complicated." "It is," Hannah said. Evan squeezed her hand. "But it's okay," he added. Hannah smiled faintly. "Yeah," she said. "It is." Then she looked back at Omar, her expression shifting, becoming more serious, more direct. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Omar didn't answer immediately. "Because the truth wasn't simple. Not anymore. And for the first time, he wasn't sure which answer mattered more, the one that made sense, or the one that felt real. The hospital room felt smaller after that question. "Why are you really here?" Omar didn't answer right away. He stood there, facing Hannah, Eli, and Evan, feeling the weight of something he couldn't measure the way he measured everything else in his life. Numbers didn't help here. Strategy didn't help. Control didn't help. "I'm here because I should have been here a long time ago," he said finally. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete, but it was honest. Hannah watched him carefully, as if weighing every word. "Should have," she repeated quietly. "That's different from wanting to be." Omar held her gaze. "I'm learning the difference." A pause. Not tension this time. Something quieter. Something more uncertain. Eli shifted slightly beside the bed. "So what happens now?" he asked. Omar turned toward him. "You stay at the lake house," he said, "until your mom is better." Eli frowned. "And then?" "Then we figure out the rest." Evan nodded slowly. "That sounds okay." Eli didn't respond. But he didn't argue either, which, for him, was something. Hannah leaned back against the pillows, her energy clearly fading. "You should go," she said softly. "They need to rest. And you," she glanced at Omar, "have things to handle." "I'll come back tonight," Omar said. Hannah didn't object, but her expression didn't soften either. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she replied. Omar didn't answer, because this time, he wasn't making a promise. He was making a decision. The drive back to the lake house was quiet. The boys sat in the back seat, the city slowly giving way to open roads, then trees, then the familiar stretch of land leading back to the water. Evan rested his head lightly against the window, watching the scenery pass by. Eli stared straight ahead, his thoughts unreadable. Omar drove. No music, no calls, just silence, but not the same silence as before. This one was filled with everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't. They arrived just as the sun began to set. The lake reflected the fading light, calm and untouched. From the outside, the house looked exactly the same. Still. Perfect. Unchanged. But as Omar stepped out of the car and walked toward the door, something felt different. He didn't know why, not yet. Eli noticed it too. "What?" he asked. Omar didn't answer. He just reached for the door, unlocked it, pushed it open, and stopped. For a brief second, He didn't move. Because the air inside the house wasn't the same. It didn't smell like dust or disuse or time standing still. It smelled clean, fresh, lived in. Evan stepped past him, looking around. "It doesn't feel empty," he said. Eli frowned. It didn't feel like this before. Omar's gaze moved slowly across the room. The furniture was in place. The floors were spotless. The kitchen counters, cleaner than they should have been. Too clean. He walked further inside, his steps slower now, more deliberate. He opened a cabinet. Dishes, arranged neatly. Not the way he left them. He moved to the living room. The cushions had been adjusted, straightened, used. But carefully. Not recently. But not long ago either. Eli watched him. "What is it?" Omar didn't answer. He was already moving again, toward the back of the house, toward the small hallway that led to the utility room. He opened the door. Inside. Cleaning supplies. Organized. Restocked. Not old. Not forgotten. Maintained. Omar stood there for a long moment. Something in his chest tightening. Not confusion. Not suspicion. Recognition. Behind him, Eli spoke again. "You didn't do this?" "No." Evan stepped closer. "Then who did?" Omar didn't need to guess, but he needed to be sure. He turned, walking back toward the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The air was cooler now, the sky darker. A faint light flickered from a neighboring property down the road. He walked toward it without hesitation. The boys followed. A small house stood about 50 yards away, partially hidden by trees. The porch light was on. Someone was home. Omar knocked. A moment later, the door opened. An older man stood there, his expression shifting slightly when he recognized who was standing in front of him. "Well," he said slowly, "didn't expect to see you back here." Omar didn't waste time. "Who's been taking care of the lake house?" The man raised an eyebrow. "You don't know?" Omar's jaw tightened. "Know what?" The man leaned slightly against the doorframe. "Your girl." Omar stilled. "What?" "Hannah," the man said simply. "She's been coming by for years, cleaning, fixing things, making sure the place didn't fall apart." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Evan looked up at Omar. "She came here?" he asked. The man nodded. "Every couple of weeks, sometimes more. Said it mattered." Eli frowned. "Why?" The man shrugged. Didn't ask. But she never missed it. Omar's mind went still. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The house, the condition, the feeling when he walked in. It had never been abandoned. It had been cared for, protected, preserved. By someone who had every reason to forget it, every reason to walk away. And yet, she didn't. Evan spoke quietly. "She kept it for you." Omar didn't respond. Because the truth hit harder than anything else that day. While he had erased that part of his life, she had held on to it, kept it alive, for 8 years, without him, without recognition, without anything in return. Eli looked at the house behind them, then back at Omar. "So what does that mean?" he asked. Omar finally spoke, his voice lower now. Different. "It means," he said slowly, I was wrong about a lot of things. The boys didn't respond. They didn't need to. Because for the first time, Omar Rahman understood something he had never allowed himself to before. This wasn't just about responsibility, or guilt, or fixing a mistake. It was about something deeper, something he couldn't buy, couldn't control, couldn't undo. And for the first time, he wasn't sure what came next. The lake looked different in the morning. Or maybe Omar Rahman did. Sunlight stretched across the water in soft, golden lines, breaking through the last remnants of fog that clung to the surface. The air felt lighter, quieter, like the world had taken a breath after holding it too long. Omar stood on the back porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the horizon slowly come to life. For years, this place had been an escape, a place to forget. Now, it felt like something else, a place to begin. Behind him, the house stirred. Footsteps, movement, life. He turned slightly as Eli walked into the kitchen, his expression still guarded, but less sharp than before. "You're up early," Omar said. Eli shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." Omar nodded. "That happens." Eli leaned against the counter, watching him. "You always wake up this early?" "Most days." "Why?" "Because there's always something to do." Eli considered that, then shook his head slightly. "Not here." Omar looked out at the lake again. "No," he admitted. "Not here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Eli said something unexpected. "You're not what I thought." Omar glanced at him. "What did you think?" Eli hesitated. "Someone who wouldn't care." Omar let out a quiet breath. "That would have been easier." Eli studied him. "Yeah," he said. "For you." The honesty in that answer didn't feel like an attack. It felt like truth. And Omar was starting to understand the difference. Evan appeared a few minutes later, still half asleep, rubbing his eyes as he made his way into the kitchen. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning," Omar replied. Evan smiled faintly. "You didn't burn the kitchen today?" Omar raised an eyebrow. "Not yet." Evan laughed softly, the sound light, genuine. It was the first time Omar had heard it clearly, and for a brief second, something in his chest shifted. Not discomfort, not tension, something warmer, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. They sat down for breakfast together. This time, Omar didn't hesitate. He cooked, carefully, slower than necessary, but with intention. Eli watched, occasionally correcting him. Evan helped quietly, moving around the kitchen like he already understood the rhythm of it. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't supposed to be. It was real. Later that morning, Omar made a call. "Cancel my meetings for the week," he said. There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, the board will wait. That's not how this works." "It is now." Silence. Then, "Yes, sir." Omar ended the call without explanation. For the first time in years, he wasn't choosing his company first. By midday, they were back at the hospital. Hannah looked slightly better. Not fully, not even close, but stronger, more present. "You came back," she said as they entered. "I said I would." She studied him, not challenging, just observing. Eli and Evan moved to her side immediately, talking quietly, filling the room with small, ordinary details about breakfast, the lake, the morning. Hannah listened, smiling faintly. Then her gaze shifted to Omar again. "You stayed," she said. It wasn't a question. Omar nodded. I did. Hannah exhaled slowly. I didn't expect that. I know. A pause. Then, why? She asked. This time, Omar didn't hesitate. Because I'm not leaving again. The words settled into the room. Heavy, but steady. Hannah held his gaze. You don't get to say that lightly. I'm not. She watched him for a long moment, searching for something. Truth. Consistency. Or maybe just proof. Finally, she nodded slightly. Okay. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. But something close to it. Something that could grow. In the days that followed, things began to change. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But steadily. Omar returned to the lake house each night with the boys. He learned their routines, their habits, their differences. Eli needed space, needed control, needed to feel like he had a say in everything. Evan needed reassurance, needed quiet, needed to know things were stable. Omar adjusted, not perfectly, but consistently. He listened more, spoke less, and when he made mistakes, he didn't ignore them. He corrected them, something he had never needed to do before. In town, people noticed. They always did. The billionaire who had once been distant, untouchable, invisible, was now present, visible, real. He visited the diner where Hannah used to work. Not as a customer, but as someone paying attention. He spoke to the staff, listened, asked questions, and without making a show of it, things began to improve. Better hours, better pay, better conditions. No announcements, no headlines, just change, quiet, intentional. At the hospital, Hannah continued her treatment. Some days were harder than others, but she wasn't alone anymore. Eli and Evan were there. Every day. And now, so was Omar. He didn't try to fix everything, didn't pretend he could. He simply showed up, again, and again, and again. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Omar stood by the lake with the boys beside him. The water was calm, the air still. Do you think she'll be okay? Evan asked quietly. Omar looked down at him. I think she's strong. Eli crossed his arms. That's not the same as an answer. Omar nodded. No, it's not. Eli looked out at the water, then back at Omar. But you're staying, he said. Yes. Eli studied him. Longer this time. Then finally, he nodded. Not fully trusting, not completely convinced, but no longer pushing him away. And that meant more than anything Omar had achieved in years. Because this wasn't about power, or control, or success. This was something else. Something earned. Something fragile. Something real. And for the first time in his life, Omar Rahman was learning how to hold on to it. The lake was quiet that evening. A soft breeze moved across the water, carrying the scent of pine and something lighter, something that felt like the beginning of change. The sky was painted in shades of gold and fading blue, the kind of sunset that didn't ask for attention, but earned it anyway. Omar Rahman stood at the edge of the dock. The same place. The same view. But nothing about it felt the same. Footsteps approached behind him. He didn't need to turn. He already knew. Hannah. She walked slowly, carefully, her strength still not fully returned, but steady enough to carry her forward. The hospital had allowed her to leave for a few hours, just enough time to breathe something other than sterile air. To come back here. To this place. She stopped a few steps behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't heavy. It was honest. You kept it, Omar said quietly. Hannah followed his gaze toward the house. I tried, she replied. That's not what I meant. She looked at him then. Really looked. You kept this place alive, he continued, for 8 years. Hannah's expression didn't change much. It wasn't about the house, she said. Omar turned slightly. Then what was it about? She hesitated, just for a second, then answered, a version of my life that didn't feel broken. The words settled between them. Simple, but undeniable. Omar nodded slowly. I left that version behind. I know. And you didn't. Hannah looked out at the water. No, she said softly. I didn't. Another pause. Longer this time. Not filled with tension, but with understanding. Omar stepped closer to the edge of the dock, his hands resting loosely at his sides. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. Hannah didn't interrupt. Everything in my life was falling apart back then, he continued. My father, the company, I thought if I stayed, I'd lose everything. And you didn't want to risk that, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Hannah nodded once. That makes sense. Omar frowned slightly. That's it? What do you want me to say? She asked gently. That you should have stayed anyway? Yes. The honesty in his voice caught even him off guard. Hannah studied him for a moment. Then she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You're right, she said quietly. You should have. The words didn't carry anger, just truth. And somehow, that made them heavier. Omar looked down briefly. I didn't know about the boys. I know. I would have, maybe, she said. He looked up again. Maybe? Hannah met his gaze. You didn't come back, she said, even before you knew about them. That stopped him. Because again, it was true. There had been time, opportunities, moments where he could have returned, checked, asked. But he hadn't, because he had chosen not to. I thought it was easier to move forward, he admitted. Hannah gave a small, almost sad smile. It usually is. The wind shifted slightly, brushing past them. Omar exhaled slowly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not trying to, he looked at her. Then what are we doing? Hannah considered the question, then answered. We're starting from where we are, not from the past, not from what was lost, but from now, from this moment. It wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. But it was real. Omar nodded. I can do that. Hannah studied him carefully. You don't have to prove anything to me, she said. Just don't disappear again. I won't. You've said things like that before. Omar didn't argue, because she was right. Instead, he said something different. Then don't believe what I say, he told her. Watch what I do. That felt closer to truth. Hannah didn't respond immediately, but something in her expression softened. Not fully, but enough. From the path behind them, small footsteps approached. Hey! Evan's voice carried across the dock, light and familiar. He ran toward them, slowing only when he reached the edge. You made it out here, he said to Hannah, his face brightening. "I did," she replied, smiling gently. Eli followed more slowly, hands in his pockets, his usual guarded expression still in place, but less rigid than before. "You shouldn't be walking too much," he said. "I'm allowed a little," Hannah answered. Eli nodded, accepting it. Then he glanced at Omar. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "You staying out here all night?" Eli asked. Omar raised an eyebrow slightly. "Depends." Eli shrugged. "Dinner's in an hour." A simple statement, but it carried something more. Inclusion. Expectation. Something that hadn't been there before. Omar nodded once. "I'll be there." Eli didn't react much, but he didn't challenge it either. And that was progress. Evan reached for Hannah's hand again. "Come sit," he said, guiding her gently toward the edge of the dock. She followed, lowering herself carefully. Omar remained standing for a moment longer, watching them. The way they moved together. The way they fit, not perfectly, but naturally, like something that had grown over time, something he was only now beginning to understand. He stepped closer. Not fully joining, not yet, but not standing apart either, somewhere in between. The sun dipped lower, the sky shifting into deeper shades of orange and purple. The water reflected it all. Still, calm, unchanged. And yet, everything had changed. Not in a single moment, not with a dramatic resolution, but slowly, through choices, through presence, through truth. And as Omar Rahman stood there, surrounded by a life he had never planned, he realized something he hadn't understood before. Some things couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Some things couldn't be fixed with power or money. They had to be earned. Day by day, moment by moment. And for the first time, he was willing to do that. Morning settled over Lakewood Bay with a quiet certainty, the kind that didn't rush in or demand attention, but stayed. It had been weeks since that first night, weeks since the door opened, and everything Omar Rahman believed about control, distance, and certainty had been forced to change. And now, the lake house no longer felt like a place he visited. It felt like somewhere he lived. Not alone. Not anymore. Inside, the kitchen was already warm with movement. Evan stood on a chair, carefully flipping pancakes with a seriousness that made it seem like the most important task in the world. Eli leaned against the counter, arms crossed, pretending not to care, but watching closely anyway. "You're going to burn it," Eli said. "I'm not," Evan replied. "You always say that. And I'm always right." Eli rolled his eyes slightly. "Not always." Omar stepped into the room, sleeves rolled up, his tie nowhere in sight. "Smells like a risk," he said. Evan grinned. "It's breakfast." "Those are usually connected." Eli let out a quiet laugh before catching himself. It still happened like that sometimes. Small, unguarded moments slipping through before he could stop them. But they were happening more often now. And that mattered. Omar moved to the stove, adjusting the heat slightly. "Too high," he said. Evan nodded seriously. "Got it." The routine had become familiar. Not perfect, but consistent. And consistency was something all three of them were learning to trust. Across town, the hospital felt different too. Less urgent, less heavy. Hannah Brooks sat upright in bed, a book resting loosely in her hands. The color had begun to return to her face. Not fully, not completely, but enough to show progress. Enough to show hope. The doctor stood nearby, reviewing her chart. "You're responding well," he said. "Better than we expected." Hannah smiled faintly. "I'll take that. It's still a process," he added. "But you're moving in the right direction." She nodded. That was all she needed to hear. Progress. Forward. Later that day, Omar and the boys arrived. As always, they didn't make it a big moment, didn't announce themselves. They just walked in like they belonged there. Because now, they did. Evan moved first, sitting beside Hannah, immediately launching into a story about breakfast, about the pancake that almost burned, but didn't, about the way Omar tried to fix it and made it worse before making it better. Hannah laughed softly. "I wish I could have seen that." Eli stood nearby, quieter, but present, always present. Omar remained a few steps back at first, giving them space, then gradually, closing the distance. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Hannah met his gaze. "Better," he nodded. "I can see that." There was no need for more words, not here, not now, because some things didn't need to be explained anymore. They just needed to be lived. Time passed, slowly, naturally, and with it, things continued to change. Hannah was eventually discharged, not completely healed, but strong enough to continue recovery outside the hospital. The lake house became her next step. Not as a guest, not as someone being taken care of, but as someone choosing to be there. That mattered, more than anything. Her first evening back was quiet. Simple. Dinner at the table. No tension, no hesitation, just 4 people sharing a space that no longer felt temporary. Eli watched everything carefully, as he always did. Evan relaxed into it more easily. Hannah observed. And Omar? He listened, because that was what mattered now. Not control, not decisions, but presence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into something steadier. Omar adjusted his schedule permanently, dividing his time between the city and the lake. But the balance shifted. The lake mattered more. The company adapted. Because for the first time, Omar wasn't building everything around business. He was building something else. Something smaller, but stronger. He established a foundation in Lakewood Bay, quietly. No press, no announcements, support for single mothers, access to health care, better working conditions, not as charity, not as reputation, but as responsibility. Because now, he understood what it meant to leave something behind, and what it meant to stay. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, the 4 of them stood together on the porch, the same place where everything had started. But nothing felt the same. Evan leaned against the railing, watching the water. Eli stood beside him, hands in his pockets. Hannah rested near the doorway, her strength returning slowly but surely. Omar stood just a step behind them. Close, but not distant. Not anymore. "Do you think we'll stay here?" Evan asked. Hannah smiled softly. "For a while." Eli glanced at Omar. "You?" Omar met his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." This time, it didn't feel like a promise. It felt like truth. Eli studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Not questioning, not doubting, just accepting. And that was everything. The lake stretched out in front of them, calm and endless. The past still existed. The mistakes still mattered. But they didn't define everything anymore. Because what came next? That was their choice. Together. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who carry the greatest strength. Kindness doesn't always change the past, but it can shape the future. Never judge someone by what they don't have, because you might miss who they truly are. If this story touched you, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.